evening, you're with ET Now. This is the India Development Debate, the only show on primetime television that puts the spotlight on development issues. I'm Sandeep Gurumurthy, joining you live from our news centre in Mumbai. Joining me in Delhi is my colleague Supriya Shrinate. Straight to the big debate tonight in what could easily pass off as the biggest reform by the country's premier administrative service. The Modi government has opened up joint secretary level posts to private sector executives. There is a big risk in an election year when the government needs the full support of the Babudam to take its achievements in the past 4 years to voters. Quite obviously, a section of the bureaucracy is peeved about the move, while the opposition parties have raised an alarm seeing a conspiracy to build a saffronized administrative machinery. The left parties say there is a hidden agenda to subvert the reservation for SC, ST and OBC communities in the Indian Administrative Service.
There is no denying, meanwhile, the fact that this is the boldest step, perhaps, of reforming the British-era bureaucratic setup. For sure, it will unshackle the Babudam, notorious for its lack of dedication and skills. In fact, there cannot be any argument against lateral entry of skilled professionals at any level, but the real challenge is the lack of transparency and political potential interference in the selection process. In a country like ours, where even relatively transparent postings to premier institutions like the CBFC and the FTII were saffronized, there is a genuine fear about the agenda behind the big shift. On the India Development Debate this evening, we discuss the pros and cons of the big bureaucratic shakeup right here on ET Now. Let's take this across to an expert panel that's joining us, and I couldn't have asked for better speakers tonight than Srivatsa Krishna, IAS officer. His views are personal here. NC Saxena, retired IAS officer and former member Planning Commission. Arun Bhatia, he's a retired IAS officer and president of the People's Guardian Party. Shailesh Gandhi, former Central Information Commissioner, and Vivek Roy, IAS, again retired and former Petroleum Secretary in the Government of India. Srivatsa, since you're the serving officer, let's just begin with you. As a serving officer, you've obviously got your skin in the game. Even as much as a lot of bureaucrats and a big section of the bureaucracy is up in arms, why do you personally believe this is a good move?
Thank you for having me. I think for starters, you cannot run a 21st century economy with a 20th century bureaucracy implementing 18th century rules. That's simply out of the question. You need expertise in several areas today. And the idea which this government has had the courage of conviction of implementing was actually decided way back in 2008 when the Department of Expenditure approved it in principle. The 6th Pay Commission had it in its recommendations. And in 2013, the draft guidelines were prepared for bringing in private sector talent into the central government. So I think you have to balance two fundamental things. One, the need for outside expertise in specific areas where it is required, versus the fact that such expertise should not bring with it crony capitalism. It should not bring with it people with a particular ideology or supporting a particular set of vested interests, which is well possible. So long as you don't have a Suresh Kalmadi or a Praveen Togadia or an Amar Singh coming in as the Joint Secretary to Government of India or selecting those who become Joint Secretaries to Government of India, I think it's a great move in the right direction. Competition at this level is always good and will enable those inside to perform better and will also enable the private sector to get to know what the complexities of delivering within government are, which by an order of magnitude are far tougher than what it is outside. So I think it will be a two-way flow, and the synthesis of what comes out of it would be very good for the economy and for the people.
Srivatsa Krishna, they're taking a bold stand. He is a serving IAS officer and he believes that lateral entry is a good move, is a bold reform there. He's got a skin in the game and he's taking that view, but a lot of the bureaucracy is not at this stage. Let me take it to you, Arun Bhatia, because you don't seem to be supporting this move. I'm trying to understand, what is this brouhaha all about? At the end of the day, we've got a well-entrenched bureaucracy. 10 lateral, inductees is not going to change or shake the foundations of India's, decades-long bureaucracy, is it? Mr. Bhatia.
I am sorry, sir. I'm not actually opposing the move, not at all.
Sure. Okay.
2 points. First of all, this advertisement in the press given by the government is very unprofessional. We want to know the TOR, the terms of reference, the job description, the job chart. What are we asking these people to do? Every organization, even the UN, even when they advertise for middle level posts, they always give a job description. So now today what is worrying me is that we don't know what these people are supposed to do. Either they are supposed to give only technical input, or they are supposed to address the bigger problem, the wider problem of management and removing corruption. When we are saying that this is a game-changing step and unprecedented and all the rest of it, it's fantastic and it's bold, what are we saying? Are we misleading people into believing that these 10 joint secretaries who will come in the department will clean up the department or substantially clean up the department and remove corruption within, say, 6 months? I'm all for it then. In any case, let them come. But then, let's be very clear, let's not fool people, because Modi has done nothing about changing governance. I admire him, that's a different question. But he has not delivered good governance to us, and he has let down his supporters. It's not real reform, sir. That's what I'm trying to say. Real reform is Lokpal, Lokayog, Section 197, more judges, and strengthening institutions, NHRC, women's commissions. He has not gone anywhere near that. And such a big thing has been made of these 10 joint secretaries being appointed. Of course, get them in. I detest the IAS. They've let the country down. They are also a corrupt lot. That's why they supervise corruption, they participate in corruption. So I'm not coming from there. I don't like this institution at all of the IAS and IPS. But this is not the way that you approach the problem by getting in 10 people and saying it's a game changer. It's not a game changer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You are so right that these 10 people in a sea of bureaucrats will perhaps not make that big difference. But I think the real point that you raised is extremely good, and I can't agree with you more, that the real reforms of bureaucracy is to have a Lokpal, to have a Lokayukt, and I think a blind eye has been turned to that. But Mr. Gandhi, coming to you, those supporting this move are doing so based on the premise that lateral entrants have domain expertise, they get fresh ideas, they get innovative solutions to the table that generalist IAS officers seldom do. Is that a fair point?
Absolutely. In fact, if you look at this a little carefully and understand the issue, the sanctioned positions of IAS is about 6,000, and for the last decade, it's always been a vacancy of over 20%, between 20 and 30% is the vacancy. And main reason for this is that the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy cannot train more people. So it's like the tail wagging the dog, if you want an example of this nature. Secondly, most people in IAS are generalists. And last century, a century back, people had generalists everywhere. Today, the whole era of specialization, and businesses and private sector and governments abroad hire specialists which the IAS cannot provide. So, A, you have a backlog of filling vacancies which in the current situation there is no way you will fill up. 2, you can get in specialization in various forms. And let's give you just one example. HRD. HR function is a necessary function for any private unit of even 500 people. The government of India has no HR specialists, and therefore it does not know how to penalize people, how to select people, how to motivate them, incentivize them. We have a complete mess up here. Okay. And I would submit if the bureaucracy does properly, a lot of India's problems would go.
Okay, so you're in support of this move. Vivek Rai, I know, is not in favor of this move. So let's get a contrarian view. Vivek Rai, given the fact that career progressions are almost always automatic when it comes to the bureaucracy, won't lateral hiring push the IAS out of their comfort zone? I'm not saying this, but D. Subriya, former RBI governor, former finance secretary, eloquently made this point in a column about a year ago, building the case for a lateral entry of IAS officers. So don't you believe that such a move will push the bureaucracy out of their comfort zone?
Not at all. To believe that career progression is automatic in the IAS is a myth. There's severe competition, there's severe peer pressure, and you have to perform to move ahead. You cannot simply, by the passage of time, hope to become a secretary in an important ministry in the central government. It just doesn't happen. At any point in time, only about 30% of a batch gets empaneled as a secretary to Government of India.
Okay, Mr. Saxena, I will come to you. And as somebody who served as a bureaucrat and now this whole debate about getting domain experts, I have a very simple question to you, Mr. Saxena. Can domain knowledge, can domain thinking compensate for the ground knowledge, the first-hand experience, the deep understanding of our system that bureaucrats have simply by how they are inducted? I mean, a bureaucrat joins at a very, very junior level. He rises through the ranks from an ADM to an SDM to a district magistrate, commissioner, and then into the services. How they come up the ladder, and they perhaps understand the loopholes and issues like poverty a lot more than most experts ever will. And in policy making, that is as much a requirement perhaps as domain knowledge, is it not? Can domain knowledge compensate for all of this? Mr. Saxena.
Yes, I would like to make about 4 or 5 points. Number one, this experiment has been tried in the past also, and a number of people like Montek Ahluwalia, Vijay Kelkar or Lavraj Kumar have been recruited laterally. Number two, the total number of joint secretaries is about 300. So therefore, recruiting 10 people from the open market is not going to make much of a change. Although I support the proposal, because the point is that today there is an acute shortage of IS officers who have put in, say, 18 to 25 years of service. The reason being that after liberalization in 91, everyone thought that we don't require such a large bureaucracy, and therefore the recruitment to the IAS was reduced from 150 to just about 50, and that led to a lot of shortage of IAS officers today. The other point is that, today what is happening is that even for the position of, say, Joint Secretary Education or Health, we should generally go to an IAS officer. You can't find, state governments are not willing to release IAS officers. Therefore, what we need to do is not only improve the domain knowledge of IAS officers. Today, what happens in the state government is that officers are transferred very frequently, with the result they hardly get any time to specialize. In today's complex world, unless you specialize, unless you have domain knowledge, you cannot be a good policy maker. 2/3 of the time of an IAS officer is spent in the state capital or central government on policy positions. But unfortunately, IAS officers have not been able to design programs effectively or implement them well, with the result that even when you compare India with Bangladesh or Vietnam, countries poorer than India,
right,
you find that those countries have achieved MDG goals in respect of sanitation, health, nutrition, hunger, gender. India could not, because of poor accountability and poor design of programs. Many of our programs, whether it is ICDS or NEREGA or PDS, are badly designed.
Okay, Mr. Saxena, I take that point.
Officers are responsible.
Okay, so I take that point, Mr. Saxena. I take that point, Mr. Saxena. Allow me to interrupt you. I want to get a quick reaction to a point that you made, which is that this is something that Mr. Bhatia also made, which is, and I'm coming to you, Srivatsa Krishna, 10 joint secretaries when you have well over 450 already in the IAS. I mean, will this really move the needle? I mean, isn't it too insignificant a move in that sense, as being pointed by both Mr. Saxena and Arun Bhatia? Is this really going to move the needle? Is this as big a reform as it's being made out to be? Srivatsa Krishna.
Look, I think it's a first step in the right direction. The fact that this has been in the making for so many years, under governments of so many different political complexion, yet nobody had the courage of conviction to bite the bullet and move ahead. I gave you examples all from the second ARC to 2008, when it was first agreed in principle, to 2013, when the draft guidelines were formed. The recruitment didn't begin then. This is for the first time, and we must appreciate the fact that you made a step in the right direction to bring in talent at the key level where it matters. So I think it's a great step in the right direction. Ideally, I would say such recruitment should also happen through the UPSC, through the same process as what the UPSC follows, but maybe with some modifications to make up for the experience what these people bring from the corporate sector. But I think it's a terrific step in the right direction, and it will have a game-changing effect if it is implemented properly. That's the point I've been trying to make from the beginning. I can give you lots of examples. I don't know how many of you heard of Ashish Dhawan. Ashish Dhawan is probably the most successful private equity investor India has ever had. he was one of the highest taxpayers in the country. Now he's giving away his personal wealth in improving the school education system among government schools. He probably knows as much about school education today, if not more, than what Anil Swaroop does, who's one of our star IAS officers. So why can't an Ashish Dhawan be a Secretary to Government of India, or come up at whatever is the appropriate level and take accountability for the decisions that he takes, along with the expertise that he brings in from the outside. There's another, and this is all irrespective of political ideology. I mean, he may be politically one side or the other. So long as the selection is done transparently and fairly, we need people with external expertise, especially in certain areas where the IAS today has a gap. And this will, again, I repeat it, this will help the private sector as well understand government better. IAS works in excruciating circumstances. Try reporting to a Lalu Yadav or a Pappu Yadav and not to a Ratan Tata or an N. Chandra, and produce the market-like results that you expect of us. It will enable the private sector to understand the complexities of government, and this two-way exchange will help come up with a synthesis.
Okay. Srivats, you make an important point there. I think you're going to be cutting a lot of people loose after this. You're a serving IAS officer and you're naming politicians left, right and center. I do hope you keep your job intact, because that is the other risk that IAS officers run. They become so aligned to political parties and political masters. But Mr. Bhatia, if I may ask you, it's not as if lateral entry has not been tried out before. It has happened on an ad hoc basis. We've got Param Iyer, one of the best examples of the sanitation secretary. He's done extreme good work. He's working as a secretary in sanitation, but this is on an ad hoc basis. Don't you think, and I know you don't think this is like a hugest reform, but don't you think it is better that we have an institutional framework for lateral hiring, and one that is open to every citizen of this country? I mean, anybody who has domain expertise can apply for these jobs. Mr.
Yeah, I think, ma'am, that's a very good point. We have to open up this channel. Coming back to something that you said, and it's been debated right now, is, will 10 people make a difference? So I would just like to submit over there, yes, one person can make a difference if you're looking for technical input. If you want to introduce cell phones, you want to have a new design for an irrigation dam, yes, you need one man to do it and the department will adopt it. But what I'm worried about is the other part of the story, clean governance. That's been, a lot has been talked about that this is a major move to clean governance. That these 10 people will not be able to do. And there is a reason for that. Clean governance will not come because the politicians demand the money. The bureaucrats and the politicians have become one now. Checks and balances have broken down and the politicians have taken over completely. Transfers, posting and increments, departmental inquiries, punishments, deputation to the center, all of it. So when they demand the money and you're part of the game, how are these 10 people going to upset this? Yeah, I mean, theoretically, yes. If their 10 chaps are really good and really strong and honest, they can do it. But it's not likely to happen because the system from top to bottom works in a certain way. These 10 interventions are not going to change it. So when we say, are we expecting too much from these bureaucrats? These 10 guys are going to come and make a miracle happen? No. And I think in this discussion, we are totally ignoring the fact that in many sectors, it is clean governance which is more important than a technical input. It depends what you're talking about. I really feel today the department that needs the most technical input is the education department.
Sure.
New methodologies of teaching have come up. Syllabus needs reform, but that is sensitive. They won't let outsiders come in.
Okay.
Now, building an irrigation dam, building roads, all right.
I take that point. I take that point about the fact that it's not just technical input that's needed, and there are other deficiencies as well. And we will talk about the overhaul at large beyond this as well. But I do want to address some of the concerns that have been raised, so that we hear the view of the panel on that. Shailesh Gandhi, do we run the risk of these candidates being appointed on ideological or political lines? That's a criticism that's come from the opposition parties. We've kept politicians out of this panel, but do you believe that that's a genuine concern that that these appointments could be along ideological or political lines?
All political parties who have been in power anywhere have done this, of using political patronage to select not just joint secretaries, commissioners, lokayuks, the works. And they are all scared that somebody else will do it. Here is an opportunity. What the opposition should be demanding is a transparent process of selection which can happen easily. But instead of demanding that, they are only saying these will be, because they have known that most of the commissioners, Lokayuks and others that they selected and regulators that they selected were also based on considerations which had nothing to do with merit. This has been the standard. Here is a chance to demand, and I think the political parties should demand, that there should be a transparent process of selection, and that it should first, before even an advertisement, it should first spell out what are the requirements of a candidate, what is he expected to do, and then have a transparent process with at least one interview being done open to public and open to maybe TV. If this is done, we have a reasonable chance. There are lots of young people, young in the range of 40 to 55 in the private sector, who would be very, very glad to give 3 years to 5 years to the nation. And this is what this could do. 10 people I don't think will make a difference. I'm expecting this is a trial balloon. I would say 100 should be the minimum, and at some point we should look at 10% of the IAS officers being from lateral movements in this nature.
Okay. Okay. There is such a furore over 10 joint secretaries in a bureaucracy where there are 297 joint secretaries, and you're talking about 10% of that. That will be quite a move, won't it? But coming to you, Mr. Saxena, one of the issues that Sandeep raised was on the kind of people who can come in, and what are the checks and balances that are required to ensure that there are no potential politically aligned or people from a certain ideology make their way through the bureaucracy. Do you believe this can be overcome if the government constitutes an eminent panel to select these candidates and keeps them away from political interference? Should the UPSC be driving this with its recruitment process as well? Will that lend it to the institutional credibility that a process like this should have?
In fact, there has been a great deal of politicization even within the IAS. The reason is that I would disagree with Mr. Bhatia that only 30% are promoted. What happens is only 30% make to the Government of India secretary. The rest 70% are all promoted in the state government. Today, if you go to UP, you will find there is one chief secretary, but there are 12 other officers in the rank of chief secretary. And these are the officers who would go to any extent. They will meet politicians in order to get an important post. So therefore, the IAS has become an inverted pyramid. Too many people at the top and too few people in the middle or at the bottom. Unless this is corrected, you can always find IAS officers who are willing to compromise to any extent. So therefore, this present government does not need ideologically motivated from private sector. They can easily find them within the IAS too. I am sure that the recruitment that would be done by a committee headed by the cabinet secretary would by and large take people on merit. It would be impartial, and there would be people who would contribute. But as I said earlier, this would only mean a very marginal change because the number is very small. If you want to make a long-term and big difference, you must improve the specialization within the IAS. In other words, after the first 10 years of service, you should ask an IAS officer, do you want to go in finance or education or social sector or agriculture, and help him in specializing in that both in the state government and in Government of India. But this would require there should be some check on too many transfers which take place within the IAS at the state level.
Okay.
You can easily find fellows who have just put in 4 months or 6 months on a job. How can you specialize? How can you contribute? How can you have domain knowledge if you're not allowed to specialize, if you're not allowed to continue on, a good job?
Okay, fair point, Mr. Saxena, and I think
look at the larger picture.
Sure. Allow me to interrupt you. I take that point, and I do hope we'll find the time to talk about these structural changes that need to happen to reform bureaucracy. I know you've written a lot on this issue, and I've read some of your pieces, and I do hope to cover some ground there. But again, one important question, Mr. Vivek Rado, getting back in the debate, most ministries already have at least 15 officers of the rank of a joint secretary. So I'm trying to understand how tectonic is this shift, how significant is this move. So help us understand if there are 15 officers of the rank of a joint secretary in any given given ministry, how difficult will it be for these lateral entrants to fit into the system and affect a meaningful change? I mean, you know, it's great to get these lateral entrants, but can they really affect a meaningful change with the current existing bureaucracy so well entrenched? Mr. Rai?
I think they will suffer from a severe handicap, and because you know what happens is that the IAS as well as the other All India services, they have a lot of social capital. Capital is not about finance and about physical capital only. Capital is also about social capital. So there are networks, there are old relationships, there are shared experiences, there are shared challenges. So you know, the whole ecosystem is quite complex, and it's not easy to break into this ecosystem. So I don't think the lateral entrants will actually be very comfortable, and I doubt if you know, they will be able to survive very long. It will be like fish out of water. And I might mention to you that Australia tried this a few years ago, but they tried it at the level of the secretaries, not at the level of the joint secretaries. And as a member of the Pay Commission, 7th Pay Commission, I happened to visit Australia and discuss it with their equivalent of their cabinet secretariat and their Prime Minister's office. They said the experiment did not work. Most of the people who were recruited from the market left after some time. And by and large, it's the career civil servants who now occupy those positions in the Australian civil service, with a few honourable exceptions.
Okay, Mr. Bhatia, you want to make a point there very quickly? You can go ahead and make your point, because then I have a follow-up with Mr. Srivatsa. Go ahead and make your point, Mr. Bhatia.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Just a small point, just a slight disagreement. You see, I agree that one is skeptical whether these 10 people will be able to do anything. But on the other hand, these are 10 very special people selected from the entire country. And if the man is worth the selection and worth giving this post to, yes, individually he can see that he controls the department. He is a manager. He can control the department. His writ should be respected right from the top, right down to the village officer. That is what his skill is. That is what he's come there to do. That is what he wants to teach the IAS and the IPS bureaucrats sitting at the top who express helplessness. Arey sab corrupt hai, hum kya karenge? Now this man must change this. Then he's worth his salt. That's why he's coming in. One man can make a difference is what I'm trying to say.
Change the system. No, I understand. I get your point that the onus is on him to change the system up until the last bureaucracy. But I don't know if he can do that. I mean, he can't single-handedly change the system. But let's talk about a larger point. And Srivatsa, you know, this point was alluded to earlier in the debate very tangentially. Let's take this head on. Given the fact that this is going to be at best a 5-year posting, how does one address genuine concerns that lateral entrants will use this to embellish their CV or maybe to serve private vested interests? How does one ensure that they have their skin in the game? And you know, without taking any names, I must tell you that I see a lot of these, you know, OSDs and PS to ministers who come in and you know, work here for 2 years, 1.5, 2 years, 3 years. They get it on their CV that they work with the government of India with some of the top ministers. And you know, it's their ticket to stardom, it's their ticket to a Harvard, it's their ticket to MIT and places like that. So I'm really trying to ask you the question that how do you separate embellishing of CV, you know, putting it looking good and serving private vested interests away from what they genuinely require to do? Srivatsa.
Supriya, you took objection to my naming some politicians, but that was done to make a point. And the point is, irrespective, you pick the political party you like. It should not be somebody from there who is coming in as a joint secretary.
I am not taking any objection.
No, just to your earlier point.
I am in agreement with you. Srivatsa.
I'm coming back to your.
I am in agreement with you. I am saying it is this political. I am in agreement with you. I am saying this political patronage is what needs to end.
No, right now there is none. There is nobody at the joint secretary level who's come in through a political route at all. So it's not there in the first place for it to end. So you're wrong in that respect. What I'm trying to say is the names were taken to make a point.
I'm talking about the existing bureaucrats.
I can take another name and say you don't want someone to be a bank regulator who's related to Chanda Kochar. You are trying to bring in expertise at the same time, not bring in vested interests or conflict of interest. As simple as that. To your point, if somebody is coming here to embellish his CV and go away after 5 years, what is wrong with that? So long as he performs when he is in this job and he embellishes his CV. OSDs, by the way, you mentioned OSDs. There are a number of OSDs that are extremely well qualified, but OSDs don't read files. They don't take decisions. They are not in decision-making positions. They informally advise the minister on issues which the minister expects them to advise on. OSD is not the same as a joint secretary. And by the way, in this government, we've had some fantastic OSDs, people who've come with extremely good backgrounds. Some of the top MBAs and PhDs have come in and have gone away. That's a different story. You're talking about the cutting edge of policy, which is the joint secretary level. I think if somebody comes in from the private sector, does 5 years of good work, uses that to go somewhere else, so be it. Why do you grudge him that? So long as he is coming here with the right intent to contribute to nation building, to contribute to specialized talent, which is what he brings to the table. And yes, he would at the same time realize that the solution to every government problem is not outside the government. They would realize that once they come in too. So I think you need to balance a whole bunch of different interests, and that is what this move. What I think you need to give credit to this government too is the fact that they've had the courage of conviction to bite the bullet and bring people in. People have been talking about it for 20 years. As NC put it, you've had Lavraj Kumar, you've had Monte Ahluwalia, you've had Nandan. Nandan is not ideologically, even though he contested election, he is a fabulous example of someone who came and made a game-changing difference. Param Iyer, would you say Param Iyer is aligned to the BJP? Far from it. He's probably the best sanitation expert in the world today, and the World Bank, he made a name for himself. If such talent can come into the existing system and be game changers, why not expand that? Why not bring it at the joint secretary level, at the additional secretary level, even at the secretary level? I see no harm in it whatsoever. I think it should be done. It will lead to good things.
Mm-hmm. Fair point. I take that point, but Vivek, I have the same question to you, which is that, given the fact that it's going to be, we've heard one view, let's get the other view in on this very question. Given the fact that it's going to be at best a 5-year posting, how does one address this concern that they will be here to embellish the CV? And I take Sivat's point that, there's nothing wrong in it, but the larger point that, how does one address the concern that they may not be here to represent a vested private interest? Again, these are concerns raised by the opposition, and I want to hear both sides of the argument on this particular issue. Vivek Rai.
Well, it's not possible to ensure that because, they will leave after some time. They are not, they are not there for the full career, and therefore ensuring accountability is going to be difficult. And, you must understand what the All India Service is and what the IAS is. The IAS is supposed to work in the field. It is recruited by the central government and born on state cadres. It is supposed to work in the field and bring that field experience to bear on policy making in the center. And the policy making at the center is supposed to be taken back to the field. Now, this two-way flow is the foundational principle of the Indian Administrative Service, and this is how it was conceived. Now, if you don't want this two-way flow, then you can abolish the IAS, because then you can recruit people at the state level and at the central level. There need not be any flow of people from one to the other. And why have an All India Service? Why did the government or the political masters in their wisdom conceive of this flow from the center to the states and the field and vice versa? So, when somebody has worked in the Santal Parganas, or somebody has worked in Bastar, or somebody has worked in the tribal areas of Arunachal Pradesh, or somebody has worked in the deserts of Rajasthan, and he comes into the center and looks at a scheme for education or health, which is working on multiple dimensions across the country. He brings to bear a certain knowledge which a lateral entrant sitting in Washington or New York or Delhi or Bombay just cannot bring. It's just not possible.
Okay, that's a contrarian view from Vivek Rai. I'm glad we're getting all sort of views on this debate for our viewers to make their point. I know Shrivat Krishna wants to come in. I need to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to take this debate forward, and we'll also touch upon the points made there by Dr. NC Saxena on the overall reform that the bureaucracy need. We're going to take a very short break. Back in a moment. The panel stays with us. Back in a moment on this fascinating edition of the India Development Debate. Do stay with ET now.
Good to be back with you once again on this edition of the India Development Debate. Let's put the spotlight on what could be the lateral changes that are required in the existing bureaucracy with this. And Shrivat, is it critical then that lateral entry of these domain experts should be complemented with allowing lateral exits of serving IS officers to private sector for 3 to 5 years to specialize in these sectors, to specialize in these domains, to have an exposure that they cannot have while serving in the Indian bureaucracy?
Absolutely. I think that is a very important step. It was always there in the rules, but there has been some modification in the past. You should allow IAS officers who are employable in the private sector and in the places like the multilateral agencies, World Bank, etc., to go out, get that experience and come back. And there are, as of now, I can think of at least 50 to 60 serving IAS officers who quit mid-career and went off to the private sector, not for reasons other than merit. They're not guys who've gone there to open doors or carry bags for somebody. They've gone there because they've been wanted. I can give you any number of examples of those who have gone there and have done exceptionally well. They're also the other kind who go out for other reasons, and we're not talking about those now. So I think it's absolutely important and necessary that there should be a two-way revolving door so that people inside can also go out, get the kind of skills which is required for today's economy, and then come back in to again serve the government. When you can have people from the private sector come in and open up the doors for them to come in and add value to delivery of government services or design of government services, why not have your own people go out and come back in?
And I can see Dr. Saxena nod his head there. I'm coming to you, Shailesh Gandhi, but a quick question to Dr. Saxena, because he raised the point on reforming bureaucracy. Now, Dr. Saxena, you've been scathing in your assessment of the bureaucracy, and I'm going to quote from an article that you'd written for the benefit of my viewers. You say, and I quote, "An important factor which contributes to the surrender of senior officers before political masters is the total lack of any market value and lack of alternative employment potential. Beyond the government, they have no future because their talents are so few. Most IAS officers thus end up as dead wood within a few years of joining the service, and their genius lies only in manipulation and jockeying for positions within the government." That's a scathing indictment of the state of bureaucracy. How does one reform the bureaucracy then?
In fact, it is not very difficult. First of all, as I said, we have to decide that there should be security of tenure. Unfortunately, although Supreme Court has also issued orders that no one should be transferred within the first 2 years of any posting, you will find that in backward states, maybe true of all states in India, the average tenure of an IAS officer in any posting is not more than a few months. So therefore, he doesn't get any inclination, or there is no desire in him to specialize or to make some changes. Secondly, as I said, after the first 10 years of service, we should encourage specialization by asking IAS officers what are the sectors in which you want to specialize, and therefore we should ensure that there are experts in tribal welfare, in education, in health, in poverty alleviation programs, just as there could be in good governance, etc. Thirdly, I would say that, as Shrivastava also said, there has to be two-way flow. IAS officers should be allowed to go to civil society, to research organizations, just as people from research organizations should be asked to work as joint secretaries. Unfortunately, there would be very few IAS officers who would like to go to a research organization. They would like to go to private sector and work with large companies or work with the World Bank. That of course, I'm not against that, but it shows that the desire in the IAS officers to work on social sector, on sectors where we really require good domain knowledge, expertise, passion, etc., is lacking. That is where training institutions plus our politicians plus our systems, they need to work to ensure that once you ask the IAS officers where you want to specialize, there should be someone who would say, yes, I want to work on tribal affair, or I want to work on nutrition. My own gut feeling is that there would be many people wanting to work on economic affairs, banking, or steel, etc. Not many people would be willing to work on education, etc. So therefore, social sector where our performance is so poor, poorer than what it is in Bangladesh or Vietnam, we do require a great deal of effort to see that there is expertise. After all, because these are subjects where you have a state list, you have a concurrent list, and therefore you need a system or a service where people have worked not only in the field but also at the state level,
right,
and then they work
right,
at the government level. There is no escape
right,
from getting
sure,
rid of IAS officer. You have to have the IAS.
Yes. No, you can't get rid of the bureaucracy. You need an all India service. But given the way these services are designed, and Mr. Gandhi, this one's for you. Is there any incentive for civil servants to acquire domain knowledge? The point that Mr. N.C. Saxena made, that you want to specialize in travel. But you know what? In the government here in New Delhi, travel may not be the most exciting thing, and travel may not be perhaps the most, may not be the A-lister. You could be knowing all the intricacies of law and economic policy making, for instance, and still be posted in the sports ministry. What is the incentive for a bureaucrat to acquire domain knowledge?
I would slightly disagree with Mr. Saxena. Part of the knowledge is gained by specialized education today. A person in journalism 30 years back just walked in from any graduation. Today, you go to a journalistic school and you go further into that. Similarly, all these domain expertise that we are talking of will not come by a journalist saying after 10 years or 15 years that I want to specialize in this. He may want to do that, but how good will his knowledge be is something which is doubtful. Alternately, if you get people who are already specialized in that or who already successfully worked in that, I think you have a better chance of succeeding. Let us stop thinking of the IAS officers only and think of the nation and think of the fact that we have, as your chart shows, one of the worst bureaucracies in Asia. Let's recognize this, and therefore we need to make a change. We need to make a dramatic change, and I am still saying 10% of the IAS officers should be by lateral entrance, and that's not going to deny anybody anything. It will just ensure that there are adequate number of officers to do the job that they are required to do. In India, not one of your panelists is worried that over 20% vacancies are there. How can the government deliver? And if the government is not designed to deliver, if the government is not equipped to deliver, corruption is a side byproduct of a government that cannot deliver.
That's a fair point you're saying, and what about filling the vacancies? That's a fair point you're making. But I want to also address the elephant in the room. Vivek Rai, coming to you, would you admit, since we're talking of reforming bureaucracy, would you admit that the performance appraisal process for IAS is fundamentally broken? It's designed in a manner that every officer is almost invariably rated as excellent. People are almost always given scores of 9 and 10. So is the performance appraisal process broken? Vivek Rai.
No, I don't think so, because if you take let us say you take a batch of 100 people, about 30% would become secretaries to Government of India. So 70% are getting weeded out. So you can't say the performance appraisal is broken. There is a lot of weeding out that's happening. At the joint secretary level, the weeding out is slightly less. At the additional secretary level, it reduces, and at the secretary level, it reduces further. I think to be fair, there needs to be a stronger weeding out process at the state government level. That is where the automatic escalatory ladder comes into play. So regardless of whether you make it to the central government at senior positions or not, you end up getting those same scales and the same perks at the state level. So I would yield to the argument that there is need for greater vigor in performance appraisal at the state level. Central level is pretty rigorous as it is. It can always be looked at and improved if so required. And now you have a 360-degree performance appraisal, which takes in feedback from peers, juniors, seniors, and so on, all stakeholders. So there's an added dimension to performance appraisal. So it would not be fair to say that the performance appraisal process is broken, but I would say that at the state government level, it needs to be strengthened.
Okay, just to carry on your point a little forward, Mr. Bhatia, is there a mechanism wherein the system picks out the sharpest and the brightest officers and fast tracks them? Is the IAS hostage to an archaic principle of seniority? I mean, why is it that someone with greater domain expertise, who's perhaps serving as commissioner in a certain range, not be at a higher level? Why be hostage to a principle of seniority? Or do you believe that's way too bold a move?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and I think there are 6 or 7 points about civil service reform. I won't go there unless you're discussing it later. Let's take the ACR, the Annual Confidential Report. We are being so theoretical about this that we are becoming unrealistic. What is the ACR? Is it an objective assessment? Who is writing it? And what is the environment? We are forgetting all this. When we say that the country is mismanaged, that the country is corrupt, what are we saying? We are saying most of the bureaucracy is corrupt. And the problem with this bureaucracy now, the honest officers, is that dishonest people are assessing honest people. We don't want to encourage this system. So I actually believe 2 points. One, because of corruption, actually the corrupt are getting encouraged. Merit is not counting for this reason. And corruption is very prominent, it's very demanding. The politicians demand it, the seniors demand it. Let's not forget that. Inside that system, you are giving people the right to assess others. Who are the losers? It's the honest people who are the losers. Number two, we've sold ourselves now to the politicians. It's the minister who endorses the ACR also. We need to build a steel frame where we maintain some of our independence. We've just been losing it slowly and gradually, as I pointed out earlier. We need to regain that so that the good people get a chance to work. Let's build this steel frame by doing certain things. You abolish the ACR, you put in objective indicators of performance wherever possible. Land acquisition, resettlement of project affected people, you put in numbers and figures and statistics to the extent possible. Assess the person on that. If he performs well, promote him. No interviews, no ACRs, because that is abusing the system, you're abusing the honest.
Okay, I take that point and I want Dr. Saxena to react to that point made by you, Mr. Bhatia. And this is a point that you said in your article as well, Dr. Saxena. Structure of reward and punishment is decidedly and squarely in the hands of politicians. How does one reverse that?
Well, in fact, that is very true that politicians are not judging IS officers honestly and correctly. Therefore, what we should do is revert back to the pre-1970 position where politicians were not asked to write the ACRs. ACRs of IS officers were written only by IS officers, or they were judged by a committee. The present system of writing the ACR and of selection in Government of India, which has been introduced in the last 2 or 3 years, I think it's a good system whereby we are trying to do 360 degrees assessment, ask his retired seniors, ask his juniors about his performance. But the problem arises where politicians, in order to put pressure on IS officers, they start spoiling or giving very incorrect kind of ACRs. If you accept this suggestion, then I would make another suggestion, which is done in the armed forces. That is, you start retiring at the age of 48 or 50, because the only way you can avoid too many people at the top and IS becoming an inverted pyramid where there are very large number of chief secretaries, very large number of DG police. If you want to avoid that, the only solution would be to encourage them to take early retirement. But that should be done only when we are sure that we have been able to assess IS officers correctly, and the general reputation of this evaluation system has to be credible. If that is not so, then you can't start.
So to narrow the top,
just as they do it in the armed forces.
Right. That's an interesting point, that weed them out early so that the process at the top gets more acute. But Srivat, since you're the serving IS officer on this panel, we'll let you have the quick last word. Will this be seen as a piecemeal reform, or could this actually potentially lead to an overhaul of the bureaucracy? Are numbers skewed against an overhaul bureaucracy? Just 10 joint secretaries.
I think it's a game-changing first step. It can lead to an overhaul of the bureaucracy. But remember, the most important thing is you cannot manufacture courage of conviction. You cannot manufacture speaking truth to power. You cannot manufacture judgment. You cannot manufacture character. And these are spread across the private sector and the IAS uniformly. It's not as if those in the private sector have these in any greater measure. IAS, and this I'm sure Sandeep Gurumurthy will bear me out, because he's the second best thing in the IAS ecosystem. He's an IAS damad, which is only second to being an IAS wife, is the fact that IAS is a leadership cadre. It should remain a leadership cadre, get the requisite technical skills, and have those leadership traits which I just mentioned, irrespective of who the political party is in power, and say it with firmness, conviction and evidence to back your argument. Rest all will fall in place as night follows the day.
Okay, on that note, completely timed out. Can't thank this panel enough. Srivats Krishna, Vivek Rai, Dr. N.C. Saxena, Mr. Bhatia and Mr. Gandhi. Really appreciate you joining us on the show this evening with that perspective on the India development debate. It's a big, bold move. Whether it's game-changing or not, one will have to wait and see, but it's a bold move with the right intent to reform the bureaucracy. Probably too small a step and a lot more needs to be done to reform the bureaucracy, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. Supriya?
Indeed, I think it's a step in the right direction, but let's not write off the bureaucracy completely. They are not a bunch of latent babus, as they're very often called. I think let's give the devil his due, but if things shake up, if the bureaucracy becomes cleaner and transparent, I'm all for it. Thank you very much for being with us on this edition of the India Development Debate.
Good night. Up next is Top 10.